Prince Harry was spotted holding back tears as he stood before a makeshift memorial in Kyiv, a fragile shrine to lives lost in the brutality of war. There were no grand monuments, no polished stone arches, no royal trumpets, just wood, photographs, candles, torn ribbons and fading flowers placed by grieving families who refused to let memory die. And yet, this humble arrangement radiated more truth than any marble statue ever could. In that space of quiet sorrow, Harry's heart was laid bare, and the world saw once again why he is unlike any royal who came before him. The Duke of Sussex walked toward the memorial slowly, deliberately, the same measured pace soldiers adopt when entering a space that commands respect. His shoulders squared, his gaze heavy, his steps sinking into the silence as though he were carrying not only his own memories, but also the weight of all those who had fallen. Observers noted how his jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a thin line, as if he were wrestling with himself to remain composed. But it was his eyes that betrayed him. Eyes glistening with moisture he tried to hold back, the same eyes that once belonged to a 12-year-old boy forced to follow his mother's coffin through London's streets. The same eyes that had scanned the barren landscapes of Helmand Province, searching for threats while knowing his comrades' lives depended on his vigilance. Those eyes told the truth long before the cameras did. Prince Harry was hurting, not for himself, but for them, for every name, every face, every family that the memorial represented. He bent down to place a small bunch of white roses at the base of the display. They were simple, almost plain, but loaded with meaning. White roses had once blanketed Kensington Palace after Princess Diana's death, placed there by strangers who mourned the woman who led from the heart. In that moment, the roses became a bridge, from mother to son, from Diana's compassion to Harry's solidarity, from one memorial to another. It was as if he carried his mother's memory into that space and offered it as comfort to grieving Ukrainian families. He did not need to speak for the symbolism to be clear. His action whispered, "I understand. I carry loss too. I will stand with you." As he rose, he lingered longer than protocol demanded. He was not there to make an appearance. He was there because he cared, because he felt the pull of grief in his chest, because he recognized the faces staring back at him from laminated photographs, young men and women, many barely past their teenage years, their smiles frozen in time, their eyes bright with a future that had been stolen. Harry's breathing grew shallow as he looked at them, and for a moment the soldier in him resurfaced. The soldier who had once flown back from combat zones with coffins in the hold, who had seen comrades fall, who had witnessed the sharp and sudden silence of lives cut short. For him, this was not symbolic. This was personal. The crowd gathered around noticed his demeanor. They saw that he did not hurry, that he did not pose for the cameras, that he allowed silence to stretch on. A mother clutching a photograph of her son whispered to the woman beside her, remarking that Harry looked as though he carried grief in his own bones. She was right. Harry did not need to pretend. Grief had been his companion since he was 12. The memory of walking behind Diana's coffin, the clicking cameras pressing into his every step, the forced stoicism of a child expected to act like a man. It was all still inside him. That wound never healed, and perhaps that is why he can recognize it so clearly in others. Princess Diana once said that she led from the heart, not the head. Critics mocked her for it, courtiers resented her for it, and the monarchy was unsettled by it. But it was also what made her beloved across the globe. People sensed her authenticity, her refusal to hide her compassion, her defiance of protocol in favor of humanity. Harry inherited that quality. In fact, it is his most defining trait. He leads from the heart, not the head. And that is why he never fit into the royal family. Because in that family, emotion is a liability. Vulnerability is forbidden. Humanity is weakness. Harry could never survive in such a system because his heart beats too loudly, too openly, too honestly. The makeshift memorial in Kyiv was a place where Harry's heart could speak without being silenced. He moved slowly along the rows of photographs, stopping occasionally to study a face. At one picture of a 19-year-old soldier, Harry reached out and lightly brushed the laminated edge with his fingers, as if acknowledging him, as if saying, "I see you. I will not forget you." He bowed his head, his lips moving in a whisper no one could hear. Perhaps he spoke the soldier's name aloud. Perhaps he prayed. Perhaps he simply promised himself never to let this image fade. Whatever it was real. This was not duty. This was not performance. This was the soldier remembering the soldier, the mourner standing with the mourner, the human grieving with the human. Harry's military years shaped him more than his royal upbringing ever did. In Afghanistan, he had felt equality. No prince, no titles, just Captain Wales among comrades who cared more about trust than about bloodlines. He had found a brotherhood that the palace never offered him, a sense of purpose deeper than ribbon-cutting or waving from balconies. He had flown Apache helicopters, lived with soldiers, laughed with them, trained with them, and cried with them. And he had seen them die. That reality never leaves a soldier. It remains tucked into memory, surfacing at unexpected times, in silence, in photographs, in the haunting presence of another mother's grief. That is what surfaced in Kyiv. The British royal family often attends war memorials, but their appearances are rehearsed, their emotions flattened by protocol. Tears are seen as unbecoming. Feeling is seen as dangerous. But Harry has never been able to disguise his emotions, and for that he has been scorned. Yet here, those very emotions became his strength. Ukrainians watching did not see weakness in his tears. They saw solidarity. They saw someone who understood them not in theory, but in experience. They saw a veteran who carried scars of his own, and therefore recognized theirs. Harry stayed longer than expected. His aides shifted uncomfortably at the edges, perhaps conscious of schedules, perhaps nervous about how long the silence stretched. But Harry did not move until he was ready. He let the grief sink into him. He let the moment breathe. He allowed the silence to say what words could not, and when he finally stepped back, he did so with the solemnity of a soldier who knows that the act of remembering is itself a form of honor. The press later tried to reduce the moment to a headline. Harry chokes up at Ukrainian memorial. But such words are hollow compared to the truth. This was not a passing lump in the throat. This was not a temporary lapse of composure. This was a man reliving his own past while honoring the pain of others. This was the soldier who had walked with the fallen, the son who had lost his mother, the husband and father who understood how fragile life is. This was humanity in its purest form, and that is what the monarchy could never accept. That is why Harry never fit in, because his heart refused to play by the rules of detachment, because he carried his emotions openly, because he chose authenticity over performance. In Kyiv, that refusal became his power. For the families who saw him there, Harry will not be remembered as the runaway prince, the rebel, the spare. He will be remembered as the man who came to their city, stood before their grief, and shed his own tears beside them. He will be remembered as the soldier who never forgot what it means to serve, the son who never forgot what it means to lose, the human who never forgot what it means to feel. He has his mother's heart. He has his soldier's scars. And in a world that often confuses strength with detachment, he showed once again that true strength lies in compassion. That is Prince Harry. And that is why, at a makeshift memorial in Kyiv, he stood not above the people, but with them. Prince Harry lingered at the memorial long after others might have left. Time seemed to pause around him. The cool Kyiv breeze tugged at his jacket. The faint sound of distant traffic hummed like background noise, but none of it touched him. He stood locked into the moment, his eyes fixed on the makeshift shrine that carried so many lives, so many broken stories, so many unfinished futures. The world saw a duke, a prince, a famous face, but Harry himself knew what he was in that moment. Just a soldier remembering soldiers, just a man remembering loss. There was no grandeur about the memorial, no marble carved to perfection, no words inscribed in gold, no regimented guard of honor. Instead, there were laminated photographs taped to wooden boards, some curling at the edges from rain, some smudged with fingerprints of those who had touched them again and again. Flowers lay at odd angles, some fresh, some decayed, petals scattered by the wind. Candles, their wax hardened mid-drip, stood like little soldiers themselves, each one marking a life extinguished too soon. And yet, in its imperfection, it carried more truth than the most polished monument ever could. For this memorial was alive. It was built by hands that loved, by families who wept, by strangers who refused to forget. Harry's eyes moved across the rows of faces. He saw young men in uniforms, their expressions proud, their hair cropped short, their eyes bright with purpose. He saw women too, Nurses, medics, soldiers, who had stepped forward in a fight not of their choosing but of their necessity. He saw teenagers barely out of school, their baby-faced smiles frozen in photographs now enshrined by grief. He saw fathers, sons, brothers, sisters, daughters. Each picture screamed silently, "I was here. I mattered. Remember me." And Harry did remember, because he knew what it was like to see young lives lost in war. Afghanistan had etched those memories into his soul. He remembered the sound of a helicopter touching down, the rush of medics carrying stretchers, the desperate attempts to save lives already slipping away. He remembered the heavy silence of a base when news spread that a soldier had been killed. He remembered sitting in mess tents with men who laughed one day and were gone the next. He remembered the funerals, the bagpipes, the folded flags, the wails of mothers. The British public and press often pretend that Harry's military service was little more than a vanity project, a prince playing soldier. But those who served with him knew better. They knew he had flown Apaches into danger, that he had taken fire, that he had lived the same hardships as any other soldier. They knew he had earned his place, and that experience gave him a bond with the men and women of Ukraine that no staged royal visit could ever replicate. When Harry stood at that memorial, he was not looking at strangers. He was looking at reflections of comrades he had lost, of friends who never came home, of the young men and women who had shaped his life in ways no palace could. He was not separated from them by royalty, he was united with them by grief. The press cameras clicked, desperate to capture the precise second when his tears welled. They always circle him, hungry to strip humanity down to headlines. Harry chokes up. Harry emotional again. Harry can't hold back tears. But what their shallow words could never capture was the depth of the moment. Harry's tears were not for show. They were not a breach of composure. They were not a story to be twisted. They were truth. They were solidarity. They were an echo of Diana, the woman who had once broken protocol simply by hugging people the monarchy deemed untouchable. Harry's tears, like hers, were acts of defiance against a world that demands masks. He never fit into the royal family because he could never wear those masks. He could never embrace the coldness, the distance, the detachment that defined the House of Windsor. For him, emotion was not weakness. Vulnerability was not shameful. Tears were not failure. They were human. That is what Diana taught him. That is what the army reinforced in him. That is what the world now sees in him. As he stood in Kyiv, it became clearer than ever that Harry's exile from the institution had been, in truth, his liberation. For here, away from palace courtiers and endless press briefings, away from men in grey suits scripting every gesture, he could stand freely, openly, fully himself. He could show the heart that the monarchy demanded he bury, and in doing so, he became not less of a leader, but more. The Ukrainian families gathered nearby noticed it. They felt it. One elderly man whose son had died on the front lines told a reporter afterward that Harry's eyes looked familiar. "Like ours," he said quietly, placing his hand over his chest. What he meant was that Harry's eyes carried grief, the kind of grief that no title can erase, the kind of grief that binds strangers together in instant recognition. Harry moved slowly along the shrine, his hand occasionally brushing against the photographs as though to offer a silent blessing. He did not rush. He did not pose. He let the silence stretch. The weight of grief deserves time, and he gave it willingly. His aides shifted nervously, perhaps thinking of schedules or safety, but Harry ignored them. He was not there for politics. He was not there for optics. He was there for the fallen, and he stayed until he was ready. When he finally stepped back, he stood still for a long moment, his head bowed, his eyes closed. It was not a bow of protocol, it was a bow of reverence, a soldier's bow to other soldiers, a mourner's bow to other mourners, a human's bow to humanity. The power of that moment stretched beyond Kyiv. It stretched back in time to 1997, when a boy's tears were hidden behind a forced mask of stoicism at his mother's funeral. It stretched across the years of his service, across the nights in Afghanistan, across the funerals of friends. It stretched forward, too, into the legacy he is building, one defined not by titles or crowns, but by empathy, compassion, and truth. He has his mother's heart. He has his soldiers' scars. And in a world so often hollowed out by indifference, he dared to feel. That is what makes him different. That is what makes him dangerous to the monarchy. That is what makes him beloved to the people. Because when Harry stands at a memorial, he is not just present. He is there. Fully, truthfully, humanly. To all my curious Sussex family, thank you all for watching, and do not forget to subscribe, like and put a comment. Bye-bye, see you in our night episode.